Welcome to this tutorial for the Nice to Gnome You gnome pattern. For those of you doing it as a mystery knit along, isn't this fun? We are at the point where we've done some decreases and it's time for us to start stuffing. Now the directions have us stuff the hat more lightly and then stuff up to about the color change line more firmly. And the reason that we're doing that difference is because the hat doesn't have to be super firm. It's not bearing much weight, and it's just got to be full enough to be full, whereas the body starts to bear some weight and bear more of a relationship to keeping things really architectural and upright. So there's no real wrong way to do this, so don't worry. I keep thinking every knit along that I will be done filming how to stuff gnomes, and then I think, oh well, I might want to do it just specifically, and so here I am doing it again. I like to take small amounts of stuffing and stuff them in, because then there is less likely to be a big gap. Your gnome is less likely over time to develop kind of a lumpy, bumpy structure if it's smaller pieces, and particularly for the hat we would go about this small. So I'm just going to go in and stuff that. Now when I cut ends on gnomes, I don't trim them. So as I'm doing this, I'm sort of battling against some of the ends that I've woven in but not cut. But it's all stuffing, so I don't mind. As you go up and into this, don't worry about stuffing too high into where we started the I cord. Just have a look to see how it's going and how it's looking. We will get a slightly flatter hat because of the way we've done these decreases. That's part of the plan. So just stuffing it, taking some more smaller bits. As I stuff, I often sort of spread things out with my fingers, kind of like that inside. That's just how I do it. Alrighty. So you can see that's taking shape. The decrease line doesn't really affect how the gnome is going to look from the front. And it doesn't even really affect how the cone shape looks from the side, aside from the fact that there is that line. So don't worry too much about exactly how it's supposed to look. Every gnome is unique, and this is my third time knitting a Gnicki, and each one is a little different. One of them is considerably smaller than the others. I think because my tension was different. Could be that the yarn was a little thinner. I did one Gnicki that was not with the leading men, and so that one has a different thickness. And so yeah, it affected the height a little bit. So there's no really one right or wrong way. So I've stuffed mine so that it is malleable, does bounce back, so it's not like when I push it, it just kind of lays flat and flat and unresponsive. It does have a bit of a bounce back, but it's definitely not what I would call firmly stuffed. All right, that'll also help us concentrate more of the weight down low, which will help us be stable. The more the center of gravity is low, the less tippy your gnomes will be. All right, so I've stuffed the hat. Now it's time to stuff the body. Instructions say about 3/4 full. This is one of those things that is sort of an art rather than a science. The reason we do this is we want to leave space for the pellets or your other weighted stuffing. That really helps the gnomes sit well and not tip over. So I'm just going to keep stuffing, and it's an amazing thing about stuffing is no matter how much you use, it seems like you can always fit more in. So when I say firmly, I'm not saying like maximum capacity, stuff to the gills, as firm as the firmest Victorian teddy bear, all right? I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying the hat can be a bit loose, the body should be nice and firm so that there is a sense of the weight distributing downwards. All right, so one of the things that you can look at when you're stuffing is where the decreasing and increasing starts. So we increased up to about here, and then we knit flat. So as we're stuffing, we sort of want to mimic that at least a little bit. We don't want to distort it a lot, but the thing about knitting is that it will stretch, and especially once we get the weighted stuffing in here, there will tend to be a widening anyways. So that's sometimes you may wonder why we don't need to add shaping here, and yet it seems like there's shaping, and that's because of the weighted pellets or other weighted stuffing doing its thing. So I'm stuffed up to about there. I will do a few more decreases, and then we'll come back and we'll do the weighted stuffing. And I'm back with Gnicki here. So we have got a narrower opening. So it is a balancing act with how much to close before putting in the weighted stuffing. It needs to be wide enough that you can get it in, but not so wide that when we're finishing up, it's annoying to work, because once the weighted stuffing is in, it's more difficult to work. Now, working with the camera above me makes it extra awkward for me, so just remember that at home it will be less awkward because you will have more space. You can lift the gnome higher and get it off the counter or the table, or just work over your lap, whereas I'm kind of having to bend Gnicki out of the way here. So I like to grab around or underneath the needles and let them hold it. If you're using too deep or too long needles, you could still have them sort of draped over your hand and use that to kind of work at it. I'm going to switch hands because I'm right-handed, and then I can put the pellets in. So it's just a matter of getting the pellets in. Now again, it is possible to kind of keep stuffing and stuffing and stuffing, especially once you start getting the weighted pellets in there. They'll start compressing the fluffy stuffing a little bit. And it's gonna be interesting. My cat is in the room. Usually I make sure that they're napping and everything is kind of completely sealed off, because the sound of these pellets hitting the table is sure tempting. But I've got to film. It's filming day, and they are wide awake but not rambunctious. So I'm hoping that I won't drop too many of these pellets and get Whisper in his hunting mood. Whisper is a bit of a gnome killer. I've had to get a glass cupboard to keep gnomes safe from him. He's amazing at hunting, and especially hunting gnomes. So I'm just going to keep going and going. The key with stuffing the bottom of a gnome is to keep the gnome flat. So this turning row here, that should mark the beginning of a flat thing. Now I know that we're decreasing and it looks like we could keep kind of going and going, and it could form more like a cone or a dome, but we want that to stay flat. So when we're stuffing, the key thing is to not stuff so much that when you imagine drawing it shut, you have to kind of come up and over it. We don't want that to be like a hill or a mound of stuffing there. So just kind of keep lifting up. You can see that because I'm dealing with Gnicki against the the table here, that I'm having to hold lower than I would like, but it's working because, well, maybe I'm just practiced at this and maybe it's just working. I don't know today. Uh-oh. You can see that I can kind of keep pushing it in and feeling around. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just kind of lift up and see and kind of diagnose how far it goes side to side. You don't want the weighted part to be so plump that this part here is like bulging out, but you don't want it to be loose either. You want this area to be kind of robustly filled the same way this area is. So obviously here I'm not quite there, but we do have another trick that's going to come. So again, you're kind of diagnosing and you're looking, but you're also remembering that we want it to be flat starting at that turning row. So I am going to do a little more of the weighted stuffing. And now, well, a little more still. To keep all of the pellets or other weighted stuffing from jumping out, what we do now is we take a small amount of fluffy stuffing, and we just kind of like seal the door. So we just tuck it in all the way around, so that as we work, that's going to act as a bit of a lid. It is a little tricky in that as you're working, you may find that you start pulling bits of the fluff up into your stitches. The good news is that Gnicki sits on her bottom, and so if you do have a slightly fluffy set of decreases there, it's not a big deal. But oh, you can see I need a little more fluffy stuffing right there. I can see the weighted stuffing. But you can also take scissors and kind of trim it off later, or pull it out with your hands. So there we go. So that is ready. I always suggest that at this point, it's a great idea to sort of set the gnome in a cup or something so that the cup can bear the weight, because now as we knit, there's going to be a much heavier project hanging from our needles, and we don't want to stretch and distort the stitches as we continue to work those decreases. So make sure that you're taking the weight either in your lap, between your legs, or inside a cup or something like that. That's stuffing Gnicki. At this point, you can kind of flip things over and see what you think. Is the gnome plump? Is it looking good? Obviously, with you having the top-down camera, it's going to look a little different to you, but I feel like from the hat to the body, there's a good sense of flow. There's nothing sticking out too much or too little. It feels about right, and so I'm done. Depending on the size of your weighted stuffing, because we're knitting this with bigger yarn, I'm saying that in air quotes, it's not bigger yarn, but it's yarn held double. So the gap between stitches is a little bigger. If you have very thin weighted stuffing and you're worried about it coming between the stitches, you can either get an old pair of like women's nylons and put this weighted stuffing in there and tie it off. You can sew little bags of stuffing, or another thing that you can do is, just like we've kind of lined this area with stuffing, before you add the weighted stuffing, you can kind of stuff all the way around the inside, and then just push the weighted stuffing inside that fluffy outer layer. And that also, it just provides a bit of a barrier. It wouldn't work so super well if you were giving it to a child. With a child, I would definitely encase the stuffing in something, the weighted stuffing in something, but for decoration, this will work like that. Inner lining of fluffy stuffing will work really well. So that's the tips for stuffing Gnicki from the Nice to Gnome You project. I hope you're enjoying yourself. Happy knitting and happy gnoming.